Hi, everybody. Welcome to the PC Perspective Podcast. This is episode 195, recorded on March 28th, 2012. I'm Ryan Shrout.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm Josh Walrath.
And I'm Alan Malventano.
We have an interesting week's worth of reviews for you. A lot of GPU news. It's kind of interesting because the GTX 680 launch essentially occurred the morning after we recorded our podcast last week. So there's been like an entire week of coverage about it, which is kind of unusual. It almost feels like that happened a very, very long time ago for us, but we never really discussed it on the PC Perspective podcast directly. So we'll definitely do that. We're going to talk to Josh about the new MSI R7970 Lightning graphics card, and then a handful of bits of news, maybe some storage stuff if Alan can sneak that in towards the end of the show as well. But let's go ahead and get started. I wanted to mention right off the bat, there was a motherboard review of an X79 motherboard from Gigabyte, the GA X79 UD5 LGA 2011 eATX motherboard review. This was published by Steve. He's now gone through a handful of X79 motherboards on the new Sandy Bridge E platform and came away pretty impressed with the Gigabyte option. He is not on here to discuss it, but it did get a gold award, overclocked pretty well, had a lot of good features. The UD5 board is kind of Gigabyte's kind of medium range offering. Generally, they sometimes they'll have UD3, 4, 5, 7, 9, just depending on what kind of feature sets they have. This board does have Bluetooth 4.0, Wi-Fi support, DDR3 support. Obviously, I think it does 8 DIMMs. This isn't one of those 8. Is one of the 8 DIMM boards, I believe. So you're going to get any of the features of the X79 platform, Sandy Bridge E platform that you were looking for. This is going to have. I got to tell you, as a completely side note, I guess I'm a little bit underwhelmed by the not the development, the acceptance of the Sandy Bridge E platform. Have you guys heard any? Like, what's your kind of quick gauge on kind of the market as a whole for the X79 platform? Is it? It doesn't. I expected it to kind of be more X58 like in terms of adoption, but it doesn't seem to have been that way.
Yeah, well, it seems like to me that when the X58 came out and you had the i7-920, that just offered a tremendous value in terms of what we were able to do, overclock, performance, the features of the motherboards. They are all very, very high end, and so they were popular products. But now we've got the Sandy Bridge E, and for the vast majority of users, it's just another higher price point for performance that they can get with the i5 2500K or 2500 or the i7 2600K. You can go a little higher and get the 2700K, and it seems like the performance of those parts are just right in the same kind of area as the X79 Sandy Bridge E type products, but you're not paying that extra $100 to have that, those extra 2 memory channels, which may or may not help the type of performance that or the type of applications that you're actually using.
Agreed. It's hit or miss. I still think
the PCI Express slots are nice, like the extra lanes, but it's really hard to see the socket 2011 unless you're looking at server applications as anything but a dead socket on the desktop.
Well, it's not going to be dead. They will probably release Ivy Bridge E on this socket as well. We just don't know how much different it's going to be.
On a PCI 3 Express or a PCI Express 3.0 board.
Yeah.
Still looking. I don't know if this one is or not.
Yeah,
it is. It all depends on the processor you stick into it.
Well, yeah,
right.
And if you get a 2011 Ivy Bridge, then hey, now you're rocking.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, it's so we won't need to get into the debates of the platform. We'll do that another day. We got a lot of graphics cards to talk about. But if you're interested in the X79 platform, definitely go check out Steve's review of the Gigabyte X79 UD5 motherboard. The main crux of the last week, essentially the full week, has been the GeForce GTX 680. We've talked a lot about it. Chances are most of our listeners have read about it and have heard some other people talk about it, so we won't go into, I guess, a tremendous amount of detail. This is the Kepler GPU. This is a high-end part from NVIDIA. It competes against the 7970. It's going to be priced at $499. It was priced at $499. It completely sold out, I think, within just maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 hours of the actual release. And they actually sold some before the release of the card, thanks to some leaks and stuff. Quick synopsis of the architecture. We have moved from 512 cores to 1,536 cores, but gone away is the hot clock that we are used to seeing on an NVIDIA GPU. So while we used to see 800 megahertz core clock, 1600 megahertz shader clock, that's actually gone now. It's all one clock. The base clock of this GPU is 1006 megahertz. Other than that, from a purely architectural standpoint, there aren't a lot of dramatic differences. 256-bit memory bus, 2 gigabyte frame buffers. The SMX now has 192 cores instead of 32 cores, I believe.
Correct.
So there's there's 8 SMX units with more cores per SMX if you compare it to the SM unit that existed on Fermi. So there have been some architectural changes. There have been a lot of smaller architectural changes as opposed to any kind of major architectural changes with this design. It is a 28 nanometer. It is made, with somewhat troublesome foundry issues through TSMC and that kind of thing. What else does it have? It has 6 gigabit per second GDDR5, so the memory is running at 1500 megahertz. They did include a new hardware, completely fixed function video encoding engine. You can do 1080p encoding 4 to 8x real time, so you could it's just really comparable to what Sandy Bridge did with the QuickSync technology, what Intel introduced into their processors. And from what we've seen, what we've been told, the performance between it and what Sandy Bridge does is pretty much comparable. Main feature changes are the display support has improved pretty dramatically. This is now NVIDIA's first card that will natively support more than 2 displays on a single GPU card. So you can actually run 4 displays on a single GTX 680. 3 displays in an NVIDIA surround configuration and 1 accessory display or auxiliary display or whatever you want to call it. They integrate 2 dual-link DVI connections, a full-size HDMI connection, and a full-size DisplayPort connection. And what's actually pretty cool about it is you do not have to have an active DisplayPort adapter to use 3 monitors on this, which is you still have to have that. You either have to have a native DisplayPort monitor or you have to have an active adapter on an AMD card still today. So you can actually set up 3 1080p displays by going DVI, HDMI, and run NVIDIA Surround or 3D Vision Surround without any problems, without having to wait for any kind of additional adapters and that kind of stuff. Anything else architecturally? The main differences here are GPU boost, adaptive VSync. What else? Frame rate targeting. GPU boost is the most important thing. Let's talk about that for a second. Chime in if anybody has any other thoughts or comments on it. GPU boost is essentially a kind of adoption of the Intel Turbo Boost technology for GPUs. Nobody else has really done anything like this before. It's kind of interesting. They do a very good job of explaining it. Actually, if you're interested, Tom Peterson from NVIDIA came out to our offices last Thursday and did a little demonstration of the technology, the reasoning behind the technology, and that kind of stuff. If you go to our YouTube channel is the best place to find it, youtube.com/PCPer. You'll see a video of me and Tom Peterson. He sits down and kind of explains the technology, explains the GPU, what GPU boost is, how overclocking works, that kind of stuff. He does a really good job of going through some quick slides and showing the benefits of it. So the main idea is that GPU boost increases your clock speed and thus your voltage on the GPU when there's thermal headroom to do so. And by doing that, they are hoping the kind of theoretical goal of GPU boost is to use the maximum amount of power possible for every game. If you think about it, here's what they do is they kind of show you typical workload at 1 gigahertz 3D Mark is using 160 watts of power, but Crysis 2 is only using 140, and Battlefield 3 only uses 110 watts. And generally in the past, GPU clocks are set at the kind of worst case level. And so the idea here is that, well, if you look at a game like Battlefield 3 that's only using 110 watts at 1 gigahertz, maybe now we can run at 1.2 gigahertz and increase the performance, but also still stay under that 160 watt level if that is your goal for whatever reason. You can think of it, they did this already with both AMD and NVIDIA. Actually, if you look at FurMark and OCCT, these kind of applications that were traditionally used to just completely stress test the GPU and maximize how much power consumption it was using. Both companies built technologies, one hardware, one software, that kind of said, hey, if you're using FurMark, we're going to limit that because we don't want you to fry our card. And the reason they did that is because they realized they were having to scale down their clock speeds in order to make sure that their cars wouldn't fry when running FurMark. And rather than let that kind of slow down the performance for real gaming and real gamers, that they would integrate this type of technology. And so NVIDIA's Turbo or GPU Boost kind of does that for every game, right? They say, well, we're not going to let 3D Mark 11 limit the performance you get on Battlefield 3. So we'll increase the performance on Battlefield 3 because that is using less power than 3D Mark 11 in most cases. And it's actually pretty cool technology. If you go watch that video again, you'll see some demonstrations and the new monitoring software that NVIDIA's opened up an API for. It's really cool
you'll get
see.
to hear Tom Peterson start yelling, "Stop, Gabby, stop."
Yes, Tom Peterson throws his voice well, which is great. We're still figuring out the kinks for that, but it went pretty well.
And see if you notice video stretching at all.
No, not on that one.
Oh, that wasn't the 128.
Shouldn't be on that one. No. We didn't actually post that one. So it's GPU Boost is cool stuff. It monitors power consumption, temperature, GPU utilization, memory utilization, puts it into an algorithm that AMD or that NVIDIA doesn't really want to discuss, and then it adjusts GPU frequency and voltage and memory frequency and voltage kind of on the fly. And it happens every 100 milliseconds. So not even game to game where your clock speed vary, but it's very likely in we saw it in almost every case that your clock speed will vary from scene to scene inside a game while you're playing, and it doesn't seem to introduce any kind of stuttering or anything like that. So it's a pretty impressive technology. It's pretty cool to see them integrate that kind of stuff. I guess the other kind of.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. I was going to move on to another topic.
From a very low-level perspective, NVIDIA has done some really interesting things with the GPU because, as we knew before, they implemented the hot clock, which doubled the performance of the shaders as compared to the rest of the core. Now, to do that, they had to do things like lengthen out the pipeline of the shader, and that adds transistors. And they kind of figured out it's like if we cut back on a lot of the stages in the pipeline, if we save some transistors, that we can add far more shader cores in this shrunk 28 nanometer die space. And instead of in the previous years we've seen a doubling from the original G80 was 120 124 shader cores. The GeForce GTX 280 introduced 256 or 240. And then the latest, before this, the GTX 480 and 500 series, they had a maximum of 512 with the 500. So instead of a doubling, we saw a tripling of it, and it didn't explode the die size of this new 28 nanometer process. And that was part of the reason is that they cut out a bunch of transistors to make the shader cores go slower. And so instead of, kind of inflating the amount of transistors to make them go faster in clock speed, they did the opposite, and they were able to, triple the amount of shaders. And so we kind of had, almost a disruptive amount of performance that we got at the 28 nanometer node.
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff on the GPU side, just at the bare level. I think it was what did they also say? 3.54 billion transistor part, which is again pretty impressive, but smaller than AMD's chip, which is also interesting. kind of see that role reversal. The other kind of major feature that I wanted to talk about was the adaptive VSync. This was kind of cool. The idea of VSync is that it limits your frame rate to 60 hertz, limits your frame rate to the refresh rate of the display, usually 60 hertz. The problem is when you drop below 60 hertz, when your frame rate drops below 60 hertz, rather than kind of smoothly go down and return, it has to make it a multiple of the refresh rate. So it actually would drop it, and you kind of see this kind of quick stuttering. And depending on the game, it might drop between 30 and back up to 60 pretty frequently. Adaptive VSync actually lets the game or the driver actually disable VSync once the frame rate drops below 60. So instead of seeing stutters, you'll see smooth degradations below 60 frames per second, but it won't go above 60 frames per second still. So you don't get any kind of visual tearing. That is demonstrated in that shot right there. So you do not want your urinals to shift on you while you're playing any kind of games.
Because that would cause your shoes to get, unfortunately,
sometimes if you're really
smelly.
drunk, the urinals will shift on you. But that's probably
I've never experienced that before.
It's probably artificial phenomenon just happening inside your head. So adaptive VSync is pretty cool. They also have frame rate limiting, which is a neat feature. They have, obviously NVIDIA Surround on a single GPU. We talked about overclocking in the review, and we of course do a lot of benchmarks. Excuse me. The main result for the benchmarks is that it is faster than the 7970. And to be completely honest with you, it is faster than I expected it to be. It is further ahead of the 7970 than I expected it to be. Even after having, the editors' days and meetings with NVIDIA themselves, it feels like that they almost kind of undersold the single card performance compared to the 7970. Now, GPU Boost helps with that because in Battlefield 3, average clock rates aren't 1006. They're kind of closer to 1150 megahertz. So you're getting a 10%, 11, 12% clock speed increase. And with that, it becomes
1150 or 1050. I thought the max turbo at that regular speed was 1056.
See, that's not max turbo. That is so there are two clocks now: 1006 megahertz base and 1056 or 1058 boost clock. And what's important to note there is the boost clock is not your maximum speed, but it is instead the advertised average clock speed in a typical gaming scenario. Now that's very vague.
Oh, okay.
But your clock speed can definitely go above it, and it can go below it a little bit. But 1006 is that minimum for a normal game. Like it's guaranteed to run at that. But they're saying for a typical game in a typical system running a typical workload, you'll see 1058. But if your game uses a lot less power, Battlefield 3 being one of those games that is heavy, it's just bottlenecked a little bit in different portions of the system. You'll see clock speeds go into the 1100s, 1150s without any overclocking settings. With you adjusting nothing, the card will be able to do that all by itself. Which again is what I think is really cool about the feature is that it just works, and it just works well too. So it's interesting. So it's better performer. It has new cool features like that. It's more power efficient. It uses less power under load than the 7970 does, and it costs less than the 7970. Now it's not in stock, and that sucks, of course. But we had the same issue with the 7970 after the first couple of days of its release. So we'll see if NVIDIA is able to catch back up. I've been told that in the first week of April, they expect a larger shipment than even they had available on launch day. So if you're looking for 680, keep your eyes out for that. Also, look, there's tons of other stuff on the 680 to talk about. I really, really encourage you guys to go to the review, PCPer.com. It's still one of the top articles on the homepage, obviously. Look at that. Go to youtube.com/PCPer and watch the video of myself and Tom Peterson kind of explain the technology. They did a pretty good job of that in there. If you still need some more information after you're done reading our review. But there's tons more information there, and it's a pretty impressive product. Excuse me.
Yeah,
He
nobody was
predicted-
expecting NVIDIA to have a product like this. They thought it was going to be just along the same path. It's going to be larger, it's going to be hotter, it's going to be faster. But in fact, they just kind of turned everything around except that whole faster part. It's a small die size. It's clocked pretty. I mean, they're not calling it their own gigahertz, edition of product, but they certainly could if they wanted to. But yeah, this was really unexpected. This is something that NVIDIA really snuck up on the industry with and surprised everyone, especially AMD.
Now, the other thing I'll mention is Matt Smith published a review of the Acer Aspire Timeline Ultra M3. We kind of already talked about Kepler mobile performance a little bit last week, I believe, because we got to talk about it a little bit early. But this is, I'm not going to talk a whole lot about this, but you definitely should go to the site and read his kind of look at the idea of Kepler on an Ultrabook, the idea of a discrete GPU on an Ultrabook. Now, the Timeline Ultra M3 is maybe not a great example of it because it has some pretty fundamental design flaws, like a power button that you can accidentally hit. But that's not really the fault of a GPU. So, I had Matt really take a look at this as, maybe this laptop's not great, but what about the idea of an Ultrabook with a discrete GPU? Is it possible? Now that it is possible, what does it mean for heat and battery life with things like Optimus? Is it going to still be able to provide the right type of computing environment for both people who want to work on the go and play games on the go and that kind of thing? And I think you'll find out that it's pretty impressive. So check that out as well. But I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on the mobile side of things. The architecture is essentially the same. But yeah. Oh, and we did have a link on the homepage. I forgot to the what do I call it? The PC Perspective live review recap. Is posted on March 24th, and that's got a link to the video with me and Tom on there doing the live review, which is a lot of fun. Yeah. And I think
talking about the urinals,
talking about the urinals. Now let's jump into something.
The size of those urinals, and
that's
how
a good screenshot.
Yep. I could take a tear in one of those.
It's a screenshot inside of a screenshot. That's how we work here. So, pretty good. Let's talk with Josh about the R7970 Lightning. This is from the other side of the camp, AMD's flagship single GPU card 7970 and MSI's kind of flagship brand for graphics card, the Lightning Edition. Give us a somewhat abbreviated version of this review. What did you find?
Are you sure you want to say abbreviated with me?
I do. Actually,
ad nauseum is my middle name.
Not only do I want to say it, I want to emphasize it.
Very nice. AMD, they came out first with the next generation 28 nanometer product, and we thought, hey, they hit one over the fence. It was great. And it's still pretty good. But the problem for AMD is that they implemented a totally new architecture with this totally new process technology. And though it was not a failure, it just didn't come out as good as NVIDIA's Kepler, which, unfortunate for AMD, is, fortunate for consumers because we're going to see lower prices here shortly. But until NVIDIA can actually deliver a significant portion of the demand for their products, we're going to see the HD 7970 still be one of the top cards for sale. And I was able to, excuse me, get a hold of one of these in the form of the MSI R7970. And I feel like that guy from, who's the owl guy in Watchmen? Wow, there's a dog right behind me. Anyway.
There is.
This is a heavily overclocked card. As we have seen, the first generation products that came out, the most highest overclocked is something like 1010 megahertz. Well, this one comes in at 1070 megahertz. So it's full 60 megahertz above what other people expect. And it performs very, very well. They've implemented slightly faster overclocking on the memory, which runs at 1400 megahertz standard rather than the 1375. Now, this is a Twin Frozer 4 card, which means that they have slightly improved the cooling solution. And in this case, they have implemented two 10-centimeter fans rather than the 8-centimeter fans of the previous generation of product, which was, as I try to lift this monstrosity up, the R6970 Lightning. And, for a while, this was, pretty much one of my favorite cards. It was great performer. It was, pretty heavily overclocked out of the box. It could overclock really well for the generation of products. And, it just had an amazing build. Fit and finish was great. Capabilities were really good. And just as good, and I don't have an example here, was the N580 GTX. That was the NVIDIA-based product. And that was just a fantastic card. So there were high hopes for the MSI R7970 Lightning. Some of the features that they have that are unique to this is that they've added another back plate that even though it doesn't help much with performance, it does add a certain amount of stiffness to the PCB, so it's not going to bend. They've adjusted some of the voltage regulation. They've moved away from the protolizers, which was kind of a major thing for the last generation of products for both MSI, Asus, and some other guys. Apparently, NEC has EOL'd those particular parts. So they had to redesign the power phasers to do that. And probably the most significant change was that of this thing on the back. It's called the GPU reactor. Now, as you can see, it's kind of a raised thing, and under this plastic cover is another PCB with 8 tantalum capacitors that hook directly onto the back of the PCB and are fed by that little 2-wire unit. And this provides a lot more amperage and some more voltage to the GPU as it needs it. Backside capacitors are not a new idea. Asus has done that in the past. But this was, something interesting that MSI has done, and they did this because they simply were running out of PCB space, and they thought, hey, let's have a secondary PCB on the back that can provide even more power. You can remove that GPU reactor, and the card still runs as advertised at its 1070 megahertz core speed, and it runs perfectly fine with it. Those are the new features of it. The other one that I would like to talk about is that this has 6 display outputs that can be active at once. The only problem with this is both of those DVI slots are single link, so you cannot use this for a dual link DVI monitor, such as the 30-inch monitors that do 2560 by 1600. To be able to do that, you need to have either an powered active DisplayPort to DVI adapter, which will fit into one of these mini slots, or you got to have a monitor that will be native DisplayPort, like the Dell 3008 WFP. I can't remember the exact model number, but they're not all that common. So that was kind of a thing I was really disappointed with MSI, is that there was no dual link DVI to run a 30-inch monitor with. And that was something, obviously, that I had written about. Now, getting this to work initially was a pain. As a media person, we often get cards that are sometimes so hot off the press that they don't entirely work. And this was the case. The BIOS that I got with this and the configuration that I tested it on, namely a AMD 990 FX motherboard, it just wouldn't run at stock and be stable. I had to click this tab here that turned it to the it's where my pinky is, turned it to the LN2 BIOS, which unlocks a bunch of voltages. It slows the clock down to 925 core and 1375 memory, and it ran fine. And I was able to do the majority of testing by overclocking it back up to 1070, 1400. And it worked okay. Once I got a brand new BIOS for the normal mode, flashed that, everything worked as advertised, and I was finally able to get the review done. Now, this is a fast card. 1070 is a fast clock for an HD 7970, and it probably beats out the GTX 680 at that speed. But the price is $599. So if you think about it, is that extra $100 worth it for that kind of product? And the answer is, well, at this point in time, yes, because you simply cannot buy a GTX 680 at this point. That will improve as time goes on, but as they start filling up the product line and they're getting more products out there, we're probably going to see things like the R7970 go down in price slowly but surely to keep that price performance right where, NVIDIA is kind of, sitting their flag. So overall, my overall experience with this was, well, it was frustrating at first, but once I got everything to work, it just, it ran like a charm. It was able to overclock to 1170, which is not a huge overclock, but I was able to get the memory up to 1500. The performance was really, really good at that spot. Nothing really gave it fits or problems, even Metro 2033 at the highest resolution. So, MSI makes a pretty good product. And even though I had a few hiccups with this one at the beginning, we were able to work through it because a lot of this is, again, pre-production hardware. Got a new BIOS in there, and it was able to work without a problem. I'd talked to some other reviewers, and they didn't have the issues that I did with this. So it's kind of one-off, but otherwise, we were able to fix it, and it ran like a champ. And even though it did not impress me as much as some of the initial Lightnings did, it's still a really good part, and it got our Editor's Choice Award. So,
yeah. So I guess I'll make this comment here that so you don't think there's anything wrong with communicating our total experience with this card to our readers, right? This is pretty much how it works, right? We want to make sure we're as open and honest with everybody as we can. Basically, I'm saying is we got some shit from somebody online about the fact that we had problems with the card initially, yet still gave it an Editor's Choice Award. They accused us of being sold out and all that kind of stuff, which is really great to hear from people in the community, so to speak. And look, we had issues initially, as Josh said. Sometimes we test stuff really early. We got a new BIOS, it fixed everything, and it actually turned out to be really, really, really good product, as many other reviewers have commented on. Right, so.
Yeah, and certainly, some other users, they may get some of these parts with the older BIOS on that they have trouble with, and instead of saying, hey, this video card is a piece of crap, and they throw it over their shoulder and it breaks into 1,000 pieces, and then they try to RMA it, when they could just talk to MSI, get one of the new BIOSes, make sure to troubleshoot it, it'll work. Now, again, this is an absolute brand new product. I just saw it online a couple of days ago for $599, and you can still buy them. One of our listeners that is on the Twit Live IRC channel, he's already gotten one in, and it works perfectly fine for him. So yeah, this was just kind of a case of bad luck, and that I got a kind of more of a beta BIOS because I'm a reviewer and one of the first people to get one of these damn things. So you got to take it all with a grain of salt. And again, I did full disclosure of the issues that I had, and then how I was able to resolve them, and get a fully working card that in the end really did impress me with its performance. Its cooling ability, it never got above 65 degrees centigrade at full load, and that is, for modern GPU, that's pretty impressive. So
Yeah.
I still like the card. Even though it gave me fits at the beginning, it all worked out, and it turned out to be a really good performer.
All right, let's see, what else we got to do here? We got short on time again, but let's go ahead and stop here for a quick advertising break, and then we'll talk about a handful of news items when we come back from that. All right, thank you very much. So I only have a few news items on here, guys, so let me know if I'm missing something. I have kind of been MIA for a handful of days. But Jeremy, tell me a little bit about maybe we already might be seeing an upgrade to the GTX 680 as we saw it on launch day.
Well, they're talking about launching what they're calling a Hall of Fame edition. And essentially, what you're looking at with that is 4 gigabytes of RAM, which has always been, sort of a problem that NVIDIA's been having, is that when you're getting to the ridiculous resolutions with multiple monitors, you need an immense amount of video memory. So they're going to slap 4 gigs on this and improve 5 plus 2 phase power supply with direct FET. And you're going to use a 6 and an 8 pin power connector. So you're feeding a little bit more power to this card as well. Mm-hmm. And it's got, a fairly significant cooler on it. So it's going to be interesting to see, is it 2 8 pins?
They're doing
They're doing
6
another
plus
one.
8.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you're looking at 90 millimeter fans and 5 heat pipes, because we all like the heat pipes. So it's going to be interesting to see exactly what this triple fan design can do. Chances are this is specifically for people that are going for multiple monitors. You're not going to use that VRAM, even on a 30-inch display. But if you're looking at doing a 6 monitor surround system, having 8 gigs of video RAM handy for your machine may well work out pretty well. Be interesting to see.
It's cool in this picture of the Galaxy card. In the last picture on that news post is actually one of the white PCBs from Galaxy. That's actually kind of interesting to look at. You can kind of just barely see it at the bottom of the card there. But a 4 gigabyte frame buffer would, one of the few knocks on NVIDIA's GTX 680 launch is that the card has 2 gigs of memory as compared to 3 gigs in the 7970. And we can't be 100% sure, but as we get up to 2560 by 1600 and 5760 by 1080 resolutions that we tested at, the performance difference between the 680 and the 7970 kind of shrinks. And we don't know if that's because of maybe some architectural benefits that AMD might or might not have at higher at higher resolutions, maybe the additional memory bandwidth that they have, or memory bus rather, or if it is just frame buffer size. So we'll be able to see for sure if the GTX 680s with 4 gigs of memory kind of change anything there, I guess. Jeremy also wrote up a news post about kind of AMD's GPU pricing and whether or not you think they were going to stay with that. What were your thoughts on this?
Well, the base thought that I've got with this is it's a lot more difficult than an AMD just dropping the price on the 7970 to match that of the 680. Because for gamers, right now, there's hands down, NVIDIA has the crown if you can buy it. And we've given just about every company a little bit of crap for doing paper launches or a very, very limited amount of this thing that we want. We want bad, but we can't get it, which is just frustrating. But you can't base a business model off that. You can't say, oh, don't worry about NVIDIA. The cards are great, but no one will ever be able to buy them. They're going to keep buying ours. But problem is, there's a whole chain going because we've talked about the compression of the GPU industry where you're looking at $40 or $50 separating models, which means if you're going to try and shave $30 or $40 off of one model, you're going to have to shave $30 or $40 off of every single model you've got going. Otherwise, why are you going to buy the slightly lower version for a $10 savings? It's a really tough position that they're in. So, is it possible that AMD can just sort of say, all right, we've recouped some of our losses and we're going to cut everything down just all at once by $40 or $50, maybe not undercut NVIDIA, but match them at least in price. It's going to be a difficult thing. Are they just going to instead go with a lot of rebates? They'll give one reseller rebates 1 week, another reseller rebates another week, so that you essentially do drop everything $40 or $50, right? Only at certain times, trying to draw people in, saying, "Oh, hey, that's a great deal, and if I buy 2 of them, it's an extra $30 off." It's an interesting little piece, and it's definitely a symptom of this compression of the graphics market, high end, mid range, low end. And in the low end, we're talking $20 at the most, separating the card models.
Right.
So it's going to be interesting to see what AMD can figure out to do to sort of woo the customer back to them to say, hey, they're a little better than us, but we can give you this.
It'll be interesting to see if they even want to do that because of the new management and maybe the new style of a company that they want to become. So we'll definitely be keeping an eye on that, like the pricing on the 7900 series, and then even the 7800 series would be affected by that as well. I do want to point out somebody in the chat room, Bug Smasher, just sent us a link to an EVGA single slot water cooled 4 gigabyte GTX 680 that they announced. This GTX 680 Hydro Copper and the Hydro Copper Classified. The classified model will be running at base clock to be determined. So we really don't know that, but there will be a single slot water cooled GTX 680 coming very soon.
Well, that's nice, EVGA, but when are you going to put out the...
That's still 2-slot. Never mind.
Yeah, I would think it's still 2-slot.
Yeah, it's
nice,
still
but still, when are you going to put out the Sandy Bridge E dual socket GPU or CPU motherboard? We're waiting.
Yeah, there's no processors for it yet, is there?
Oh yeah.
Or did those process? Oh, the Xeons did come out for that.
Yeah, the Xeons have come out.
Yeah. Very cool. And Alan, where are we at here on our storage stuff? Do you want to talk about the Super Talent RAID drive upstream PCIe SSD? Maybe how this is different from some of the Revo drive stuff that we're more familiar with?
This is actually completely different than the Revo drive stuff. This is the equivalent of what an end user might do, like what would look more like what an end user would try to do with solid-state drives in a RAID. It just happens to all be neatly packaged on a card. So like where you have the Revo drive and like the R8 and all the other OCZ type of models where they tend to use a purpose-built, if you will, controller to spread out to all those SandForce controllers. Most of the time they're just using SandForce controllers, some multiple thereof. While this is the same deal, so we have what I think it's 4 channels of SandForce. They are, first of all, they're not using like 8 chips per bank, I don't believe. So those SandForces are going to be a little bit bottlenecked. They'll operate more as if they were the lower capacity model. You know how you see various solid-state drives, and then they have the lowest capacity tends to, suffer on some of the specs compared to the rest of the line. And the other thing, it's sort of working against it, is LSI is who they decided to go through for the controller. And LSI controllers, I'm not sure exactly which controllers on this model, but just looking at the specs that they saw, if you use a regular hard disk optimized RAID controller, it does really great for sequential reads and writes, and you end up seeing pretty good speeds. And they did. They saw, like the upwards of almost a gigabyte per second throughput. Respectable. However, 4K IOs per second for reads and writes, it's like 3600 and 5100. So a single good solid-state drive, even a very cheap, single solid-state drive, can push 20K, 30K here. So you can get, you're talking multiples of what this drive is able to do for random access. Any slower than that, and you're venturing into hard drive territory, believe it or not. You put 4 good 10,000 RPM like Velociraptors behind this same chip, and you would probably hit 2,000 IOs per second, maybe somewhere around there, right? So this is really, really low on the random IOs. I don't know if maybe they can do some optimizations there or whatnot, but it just looks like they slapped the regular hard drive RAID solution onto some SSDs, which just does not tend to do well for those things, unfortunately.
Okay. What else do you have lined up for us? Is there something else you're going to be publishing this week that maybe you can discuss real quickly? Give a little preview of?
I'm going to hit the button right now, actually. If the website will
hit the button.
Hit the button. Do the thing. I told it to do the thing.
We can do that in a little bit.
Okay. So, talked about this last week, and that was that we took a look at 3 not just one, but 3 Samsung 830 series solid-state drives. New controller. We wanted to look at it. Actually, it was sort of a coordination between myself and Samsung. I said, hey, we want you to look at this drive. And I said, okay, new controller. Well, I try to look at a few different capacity points, and this has a pretty decent spread on the specs. Like, the specs vary as you go through different capacity points. So they ended up sending me 3 different capacity points, and wanted to give it the full workup, and that just ended up multiplying everything out. 3 SSDs, try to do trim testing, all this other stuff. Takes a while. Not only that, but a lot of the time I spent rechecking stuff because this dang drive outperformed everything. Everything I've tested. OCZ Octane, Intel 520 series. I mean, it's fast, extremely fast. The place that it is the most, or the fastest, the most fastest, that'd be.
That's the best fastest.
It's the best fastest. Okay, the piece should be up, so it should be on the page. Is in the IO meter testing is where we do this, this various workloads we hit the drive with, and it's just like an all-you-can-eat buffet of just throwing IOs at an SSD that you're trying to test. And we do it at different Q depths to simulate how much you're loading up the drive and all this stuff. And these things just took off in this testing. Not only did they lead the pack on the low Q depth stuff, which is where your system tends to operate at if you're not doing a whole lot of things, you just sit one thing at a time, that sort of thing. But it was the highest capacity we tested, the 256 gig model, was actually beating the Intel 320 series, which used to be like the king of low latency. It would, because that's 10 channels to the flash, and it's always just been the fastest, like turn on a dime kind of thing, even though it was only 3 gigabit serial ATA. This beat that. So, I mean, they were beating everything, even all the way down to the 64 gig model, which was not as fast, right? But still, extremely good performance across the board. And actually, all 3 drives tended to beat everybody else all the way up to a Q depth of like 8. And then there was one test where the Intel 520 just took off and managed to squeak past it at like Q depth of 16 and above. And that was web server, where you're hitting it with, and in this case, it was like 45,000 IOs per second, something insane like that. But yeah, I mean, all 3 of them, they just climbed straight up to, in most cases, 45,000 IOs per second. So just, I was beside myself. I was not expecting the performance to be that good out of Samsung specifically, because what they've always been known for is sort of slow but steady. They don't fragment that badly over time, but they don't really perform that well the entire time. That's how they used to respond, right? Even the 470 series, which is just one prior generation, I included the 470 series on those same charts just to show how huge the difference is. And it was actually sort of embarrassed, the 470, because it's well below everybody else on those same tests. But then you have that from 470 to 830, it's just complete night and day.
That's weird.
Yeah, I was not expecting it to be that good.
And to just think that the 256 gig drive was on sale last week for $299, and now it's jumped up $80. Unfortunately,
the 128 gig, I think. Now, if you're listening to this, the thing might be over, because I think there's some. Well, no, I think it might be until the 31st. Something I saw like a $40 rebate, so it was already a good price per gig, and there was like a $20 or $40 rebate on Newegg just from what I saw earlier today. Yeah, just really, really good drives. And the only page that I have, which actually as soon as we're done with the podcast, I will fill in the performance over time and trim testing. So for those listening live on the stream, very well. It's if you trim the drive, or if there's any kind of trim going on for the drive, it does the immediate snapback on performance. So, I do in my typical test where I really beat the drive hard with a situation where there's no trim going on, and it actually didn't slow down a whole lot, even in that case. And then as soon as you hit it with the trim, it was as if the drive was fresh out of the box. It basically just snapped back to new. So if you're running it under Windows 7 or even OS 10 with the tweak to make the trim enabler for OS 10 for those that are savvy enough to know what that is. The drive is just going to maintain really high performance all the time. So yeah, I'm beside myself on this thing.
Oh, over the moon.
Yep. Remember how last week I was saying, if you're going to go Intel or Samsung for reliability? I'm pretty much from this point forward until something else displaces it, I'm recommending the 830s from now on.
Nice. That's a pretty dramatic change. Let's quickly get through our hardware software picks of the week. I'm going to cheat here and say that I don't really have anything. And instead, I've already snuck a peek at what Jeremy and Josh have picked, and I like theirs a little bit better. So, Jeremy, tell me what you almost bought, or what you did buy, but maybe a little bit cheaper.
I can't believe that you didn't pick the thing that was holding the light up. I'm disappointed. But anyway,
he was gonna do that 24 pack of MaxiFly balls.
but
I don't know.
he couldn't find any of them after he was chipping it on the green.
He's a top flight man. Top flight. No?
Anywho, as much as I love this 4870, which is pretty much indestructible and has been running my system since that never to be forgiven 6950 died, I found this for $400 even at NCIX. It was a limited quantity special, so I didn't post it on the website because until I actually got this on my hands, there was no way I was going to tell anyone about it. But for $400, $79.50 is a seriously good start to a multi-monitor gaming system. It's already going to be able to handle a couple of monitors at a decent resolution, and if you want 3, well, you pick up a second one down the road by the time you picked up the 3 monitors, and this is going to keep your system alive for a little bit. I'm a little bit curious about that.
Kingdom of Gamer.
I seem to remember something similar on another one. But the $400 deal is gone. Newegg, as Burke just posted up there, $430. Not bad, not great. But as I was saying earlier, keep your eye out on these because the cards are probably going to be going on in random specials. And pick your price point. When you actually find something that's at that price point, go grab it. No reason not to.
Sounds good. Josh, you actually have the SSD pick for us this week.
Yes, as compared to like last week when I had an SSD picked out for you.
Okay.
Do you ever feel like you're in a rut?
Me? No.
Have you seen my office?
All the time.
Yeah, anyway. OCZ's got a special out for the Vertex 3 256 gig drive. You can get it for, $279? And the best part about that, you get a free 64 gig SSD drive. No, it's $309. I'm sorry. You get a free 64 gig other internal SSD drive based on their Petrol series. Not as fast. It's lower end, but still, it's a free 64 gig SSD that you can use for other things. Other things being your stash of, never mind.
Don't go
64
there.
gigs
The
worth.
callers get angry.
That's many hours for
We don't want to make anybody
Alan
else call in and angrily
enjoy.
talk about their porn collection, so we won't even
I
discuss
know, right?
your
Jealousy.
porn collection. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yes.
You alone.
But just think how fast you can access that with the
Collection.
64 gig SSD drive.
Almost as
309.
quickly as you can close it.
Almost.
Alan, do you have a pick for us?
I do. It is not hardware, and it's sort of software. It's a website.
Okay.
If you got kids and they're doing math,
I don't,
Go
and they're
to the-
not.
go
No.
to the Khan Academy website.
Oh, I thought you were going to say kill yourself.
No, Khan Academy. I can't state this
K-H-A-N.
well enough.
As in
so,
Khan.
No, C-O-N.
Yeah. So this guy started out just making
Academy.
YouTube videos of various kind of math problems, right? And then it eventually evolved to what it is now, which is a huge, there's a tree of different kinds of math that you can do. And they're all interconnected. So if you figured out this lesson and this lesson, then they're all pointing towards the next thing down the tree. And you just sort of work your way through it. right? And this starts with like 2 + 2 = 4 and goes all the way to like calculus. Okay. And
I don't
each
need no
lesson,
schooling.
it's basically sample problems that you do, and then at the bottom of each of those types of tests, if you will, there's the video of the guy explaining how to do whatever that concept is, right? And then even better, you can do this thing called coaching. So like I have 2 kids that are working through this website right now. They're just going at their own pace, whatever they want to click on. It's almost like a game, right? You actually get points, score for, badges.
I love points.
Stuff like that, right? Well, with me as their coach, I can just look up any particular lesson that they might have been taking, and it shows so many statistics on it. It's ridiculous. It shows if they watched the video, when they watched the video for that particular lesson, right? If they were doing, say they're doing a particular lesson, they're taking a test for it, it shows how many seconds they waited before answering each problem, and then if they got the problem right or wrong, and if they did get it wrong, what answer did they put in?
But did it record,
it's like-
how often they talk dirty to the instructor?
Well, unfortunately, it doesn't do that.
It hides those stats.
But it gives you all these incredible stats, so you could literally just be looking at this thing, and it's. I wish they would roll this thing out as math courses in schools, like immediately.
Well, then they wouldn't have need
because
for
it's-
teachers.
Well, no, they're actually sampling this in like I think a few schools in California or something like that right now, and it ends up flipping it, like the whole way that they teach goes like backwards because the teacher assigns the videos for the homework, so that they're learning what to do during the homework, and then when they come in for the class, that's when they work through the lessons, and the teacher can monitor what's going on with the coaching thing, and then if they see this guy over here is stuck on this thing, they can walk over and not only they know that they're stuck, but they saw how they were getting the problems wrong, right? So they could just like walk up to them
Yeah,
and go, hey,
I've watched
you
a
gotta
couple of
do
videos.
this.
It's pretty impressive.
The videos by
And
themselves
just the
impressed
amount
me.
of data they have.
Right. The videos by themselves impressed me initially, and I just sort of like put it in the back of my mind after I saw that because like, yeah, that's handy if I'm just trying to show something. But now that they've got the website wrapped around it and like the evaluations and the little tree of where you can go next and everything, it's really, I mean, anybody can just walk up to this website and learn, like start from nothing and go all the
Did you
way
know anybody can go to pcper.com/podcast and learn? Did you know
can
that?
learn, well, then you can learn all about like computer hardware. But if you're doing math, that's it. Do it.
So if you want to learn the cool stuff, you go to pcper.com/podcast. If you want to learn nerdy stuff, you go to the Khan Academy. So keep that in mind because we're not nerdy stuff. Academy.
My children flunked.
So that's going to wrap up our show this week. Thank you guys for joining us again. Just so you in case you didn't get the plug there, pcper.com/podcast is the URL to give and share with your friends. You can find us pretty much anywhere that is cool and hip, like the kids use MySpace. Do they still do that, guys? Do they do that? No?
No.
No MySpace. So how about facebook.com/PCPer or youtube.com/PCPer or twitter.com/PCPer? All of those places exist, and they only exist so that you can go there. Send us an email, podcast@PCPer.com. We always read your emails and feedback and that kind of stuff. We'll try to get to some more emails more frequently in the coming weeks. But that's it. That's going to wrap up the show for us this week. It was a little bit shorter than normal. We'll be back next week to talk more about graphics cards, and we'll have some other boards for next week as well too. So thank you guys again. I'm Ryan Shrout.
I'm Jeremy Hellstrom.
I'm Josh Walrath.
And I'm Alan Malventano.